Welcome back to All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. My name is Ty Patton. In this video, I would identify the top tight ends to target in Week 9, and I will also weed out and identify the best defensive special teams to target as well. My faithful subscribers and followers already know this, but for anyone who doesn't, I am not willing to punt any position. The tight end defensive special teams positions have a lot of variance from week to week. To put this into perspective, let's take a quick look back at Week 8. These were the top 5 projected tight ends in Week 8. Waller from Oakland, Kittle from San Francisco, Ingram from the Giants, Henry from the Chargers, and Hooper from Atlanta. In comparison, these were the actual top 5 scoring tight ends in Week 8. Number 1 was Griffin from the Jets, who scored 24.6 fantasy points. Number 2 was Fells from Houston, who scored 23.8 fantasy points. Number 3, Jonnu Smith from Tennessee scored 19.8 fantasy points. Atlanta's Hooper was 4th with 18.5 fantasy points. And San Francisco's Kittle was 5th with 14.6 fantasy points. The top 5 tight ends scored 101.3 combined fantasy points. This averages out to 20.56 for each of the top 5 tight ends. They did this on 32 targets, 28 receptions, and this averages out to 6.4 as an average per tight end on targets from the top 5. In comparison, the top 5 targeted tight ends through the first 8 weeks are as follows, and you're going to see some of the same names. Waller getting 8.3 targets per game. Kelsey, 8.1 targets per game. Ertz, 7.9 targets per game. Henry, 7 targets per game. And Olsen from Carolina, 5.7 targets per game. These top 5 have a combined 7.4 targets per game average for an average score of 13.86 fantasy points per game. I encourage you to please follow along with this chart as I identify the tight ends I'm targeting Week 9 and the reasons why. The tight ends in my player pool will have their names highlighted in green to the left. Number 1, Waller. He's 6,300. He is averaging the most targets per game on this slate at 8.3. He's had 7 red zone targets. He's scoring the highest on the slate, 17.2 fantasy points per game. A small home favorite, second highest total on the board. I really like Waller. Not really crazy about the price of 6,300. It's been steadily going up the past few weeks, but Carr is consistently going to him, and I think this game has the potential to have a lot of points on the board. Next is Henry from the Chargers, 6,000. Finally putting some games together. He's had some injury issues. I did see something earlier today where on tight ends he actually did have the highest ownership right now, but he's averaging 7 targets per game. He's scoring 16.9 fantasy points per game. Green Bay is giving up 14.8 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. He's a home underdog of 3.5 points, and the third highest game on the slate at 48.5 points. And before I move on to the next one, I just wanted to recap this chart that I have here. Obviously, the green is best, yellow is kind of neutral, and red would be the worst in comparison to the other players. On the left, as I mentioned, all the way over here are the ones that I'm on this slate that I'm going to be targeting in green. Up top, you have the salaries. Obviously, the top salaries to me will be the worst. Hard to get value with the tight ends with what they're averaging and scoring. Some of these, though, like Kelsey, have the potential to break any slate. Next is targets per game. After that is total red zone targets this year. After that's fantasy points per game. And then right next to it is what the opponent is giving up per game to that position. And in this case, it's the tight end. The opponent that they're playing and what the line is. If it's red, they're the underdog. If it's green, They're the favorite in yellow. We have one game here that's a pick. And then the last column over here is the over and under. Obviously, the higher totals are in green and with the lower totals in red. So the next tight end that I'm targeting is Ertz, $4,700. It's really odd. I mean, after the year that he had last year, to see Zach Ertz down to $4,700 is pretty astonishing. He's averaging 7.9 targets per game. He's had 9 red zone targets. He's only scoring 10.8 fantasy points per game. He's a 4.5 point home favorite. Not crazy about the over under at 41. I just have a feeling that Ertz is eventually going to have that big game that he hasn't had yet. There is another tight end on this team in Goddard that has been getting a lot of targets as people or teams focus their interests on Ertz. Chicago's given up a middle of the road 13.1 fantasy points per game to the tight end, and I just think that with their wide receiver situation, that Ertz might be in line and at that 4,700. It doesn't take a whole lot to get value for that. I mean, I've seen some defenses this year that have been 4,700 in salary. So just put that in perspective, and I really have a lot of interest in Ertz this week. And he's also a nice pivot off of these, obviously, these higher priced Waller and Henry if they're going to be getting all the ownership. Next is Cameron Brate from Tampa Bay, $3,100. Now he's only getting 3 targets a game, but OJ Howard is obviously out. He's received 4 red zone targets so far this year. He's only scoring 6 fantasy points a game, but Seattle's giving up 16 point second or third worst on the slate, 16.2 fantasy points per game to the tight end. Excuse me, 6-point underdog on the road, the highest total on the board. And I really like this. I like him as a pivot off of Godwin and Evans, or maybe part of a stack with one of them. I believe this game is going to have some points. Obviously, Vegas does too. It's got the highest total on the board. But I have a lot of interest in especially seeing here that Seattle's giving up a lot of points to the tight end position. And at 3,100, this is another player. It doesn't take much to get value with $3,100. It'd be interesting to see what the ownership is on him. I don't see one, two, three. Right now he's not in the top 10, so that's pretty good. So I'm going to have my share of Cameron Brate this week in some of my lineups. Next up is 2 tight ends from the same team, Jacob Hollister and Luke Wilson from Seattle. They're both 2,900. And start off with Hollister. He's averaging 4 targets per game. He hasn't had any red zone targets. He's only scoring 2.9 fantasy points per game. But here you go, Tampa Bay giving up the slate worst 20.3 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Seattle is a 4.5 point home favorite. Highest total on the slate at 53. I really have a lot of interest in these tight ends. There's going to be a lot of ownership go to Lockett, teaming him up with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's the top quarterback on the slate, and I think it'd be fitting to have one of these 2 tight ends. That's the issue, though. Which one is it going to be? Last week, I was all over Jonnu Smith for Tennessee, and he actually ended up being the 3rd highest scoring tight end on the slate. This is a similar situation, actually playing the same team. But it's just, I think I'm going to lean more to Luke Wilson. I didn't talk about him, but he's also 2,900. He's averaging 1.6 targets per game. He's had 1 red zone target. He's scoring 2.4 fantasy points per game. And then again, he has the same matchup against the Tampa Bay, giving up 20.3 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Home favorite and the highest total on the slate. So I really have a lot of interest, and definitely with that price. I just want to reiterate that's not a punt picking them. I don't punt any position. I definitely look for value and pay off some of these lower values at the tight end. One thing I will look at tomorrow, though, is if people are off, the player playing or the ownership is going towards all these lower owned, and those top tight ends aren't getting ownership. Some of them could be contrarian. As I mentioned, though, Hunter Henry right now, one site that I use has a projected ownership of 17%. Darren Waller's under him at 14%. Then Travis Kelce drops off to 9%. That's kind of weird seeing Kelce under 10%, but you have the situation with Matt Moore. I know a lot of people are scared of the matchup with Minnesota. Minnesota's defense. Minnesota's going into Kansas City as a favorite. So there's a lot to unpack with that, but I'll definitely be keeping an eye on the ownership as we move forward. As I mentioned, I never punt any position, but I do feel that there is a lot of value with the tight end position this week. And I just talked to you about the contrarian spending up. You have to watch that. If you have access to something where you can see some ownership, there's all kinds of different sites out there. The one that I use in particular is pretty good and accurate. And sometimes I'll look at a couple different, you make sure one's not just so way off, because sometimes you see it and it's like there's no way, and then you see the final ownership and it's way off what the projected ownership is. So summarizing my tight ends, I'm targeting again over here: Waller, Henry, Ertz, Crate, Hollister, and Wilson. Probably more of an emphasis on Luke Wilson. I'm going to figure out how to put this in the link below, but for now, if you want to screenshot this and use this information, feel free to do so. Use it however you want. The tight end position, as I mentioned, has a lot of variance from week to week, and you see the top names, but you don't always see them in the top scoring. Last week, as I mentioned, see the only one that was in the top. See, Kittle was number 5. He was projected number 2, and he ended up number 5. And then Hooper was projected number 5 and ended up number 4. But and then when you look at the scoring, it's really compact. So, but if a tight end ever goes off in one of these slates and you have him, you're going to put yourself in a really good position, especially if it's a contrarian pick. So next, I want to break down the defensive special teams. I don't have a chart for that, but I have some notes. For me, with the tight end defense special teams, I want to have a spin up option, a middle of the road option, and a spin down option. And I try to limit it to 3 or 4. I like home favorites. This week, I do have one road favorite that I'm interested in. And I don't like, there was a couple weeks, New England was 4,300. One week they were 4,700, and obviously some of the defensive scoring that they did, they were worth it. I just really hate to spend over 4,000 for a defense. That's a player position salary. So I'm always looking for value. I've done pretty well the last few weeks. Last week, I really liked the Lions. They ended up coming in 3rd or 4th and just a few points off the top scoring defense. So the defenses that I'm going to be targeting are as follows. Number 1, Buffalo. They're the highest priced defense on the slate this week, but they're $3,800, so they're under that 4,000 threshold that I like to be under. Haskins for Washington is starting. This game is in Buffalo. They're going to be chalky for a really good reason. Let me see here real quick. Defense special teams. They're second in ownership to the Panthers. They're showing them with only a 7.9%, right below the Panthers, who are 8.3. But again, at Buffalo, if Buffalo gets a lead on Washington and Haskins has to put the ball in the air, this could be real disastrous real quick. really good pick with them being at home. Again, $3,800, and I'm not sure if everyone knows it or not, but Haskins is starting for Washington. Now, coach talk has been that Haskins been doing really well in practice, but I do remember a few weeks ago when they brought him in the game, he looked like the deer in the headlights and didn't go well at all. So we'll see. Really tough draw on his first start in Buffalo, but obviously Washington's looking to the future. The next defense I'm interested in is the Cleveland Browns. They're 3,100. This is the one defense that is, and another thing about Buffalo, obviously they're a home favorite of 10.5 points. Probably go up now with the rookies starting, and it's the lowest total on the board. Now I know a lot of people like to just go to the lowest total on the board. I don't do that. I look at the matchup, and I definitely like to target rookie quarterbacks and backup quarterbacks, which brings us back to Cleveland, who's 3,100 on the road. They're a road favorite. Backup quarterback for Denver is Brandon Allen. I don't know a lot about this guy. I do think Cleveland is a nice pivot off the higher owned defenses right now, the Bills and the Panthers. Just think that they're in a really good position. They've got their two cornerbacks back, and backup quarterback. He's replacing Flacco. They weren't putting the ball in the air that much with Flacco, and so if Cleveland can shut down their run game or build a lead, this is similar to the Buffalo game. Definitely see a situation where they can rack up some defensive special teams points. And at $3,100, it doesn't take much to get value for that, and get a defensive return for a touchdown, a couple sacks, and you're on your way of 3 or 4 times value easily. So definitely have interest in them. Next up, Carolina. They're 2,800. As I mentioned right now, they are projected to have the highest ownership on the slate. They're one of my 2 spin down options this week. They are at home. They're averaging 10.7 fantasy points per game on defense, which pays off this 2,800 over 3 times the value. And they've been pretty good defensively. Kind of got beat up last week by San Francisco on the road, but now they're back home. And this is Tannehill's first game on the road. Be a lot of emphasis on trying to stop Henry. It's fairly low game total of 42 points. There are 3.5 points. Small home favorite. Those are a lot of the boxes that I like to check off when I'm looking at my defenses. Last and not least, the Chargers. They're $2,000. This is a real sneaky and just a hunch that I have. They're at home. They could get volume or a value real easy at 2,000. I do think that they're going to be able to put some points on the board against Green Bay, and Rodgers is going to be putting the ball in the air a lot in this game. He's a road favorite, but I do feel that not so much that I think they'll be the highest scoring defense on the slate, but I just feel like there's a lot of value with them at 2,000, and there's only one defense underneath them, and depending on what Adams brings to the game tomorrow, Rodgers has been doing really well these weeks that he hasn't had his top target. But I just really have, when I first seen the lines and the totals and looked at the games, I just had this gut feeling about this, and I didn't know what any of the salaries were on these before I looked at it. I just looked at the game, and I just really Chargers at home, and feel like they're going to come to play at home. And they did, they did well against the Bears. The Bears aren't really that good this year, but on the road in Chicago, they shut down Chicago. And I know Rodgers is much bigger issue than Trubisky, but being back home, I just have a feeling that they're going to come to play tomorrow. So as I said, I usually limit my defense special teams to 3 or 4. This week, my spend up is going to be Buffalo. Middle of the road this week is Cleveland. I generally try to stick to the home favorites. I just really like this one because they're going against a backup quarterback, and Buffalo, as I already mentioned, is going against a rookie quarterback in his first start. My spin down options are Carolina and the Chargers. Both of them are Carolina's a small home favorite, and the Chargers are a small home underdog. Depending on the build that I'm utilizing, I will be using one of these 4 defenses to cap out my lineups. And as I mentioned, I'd probably give more preference to the home favorites. But these 4 I would definitely be putting in different lineups. I want to thank you guys for joining me. I hope this information provides some type of value for you. Again, I encourage you to go ahead and screenshot this. Use it how you like. Remember, green's good, yellow's kind of middle of the road, and red is just the worst in comparison to the best. If you do me a favor and please share this video, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you get notified when my next video posts. It really helps me out, and I really appreciate it. Please feel free to drop any comments or opinions below. I'll be back here real shortly to post the lineup building and game by game preview for tomorrow, and look at some injuries and some more ownership. And don't forget to turn your clocks back tonight. I believe there's only like 2 areas that don't turn their clocks back, but make sure you do that so you get that extra hour of studying for tomorrow. And as I mentioned, I'll be back real soon. My name is Ty Patton. This is all about winning daily fantasy sports. Thanks a lot.